Every collector has one item that they don't want to sell, the one with greater significance than money. Frank Fritz saw that piece as a car he concealed from the public. The shocking truth about his most valuable asset, and the agonizing reason he kept it a secret from everyone, including his followers, was revealed when the garage door swung open after his death. I recall seeing one of them for the first time. I was 14 years old. Because this car was more than just a collector's item, there was a person down the street who owned one. It served as a memorial to a broken promise and a tragic secret that he kept till the end of his life. The man who came before the celebrity. Every tiny town seems to have a certain location that exudes nostalgia, don't you think? That location was Frank Fritz's garage. It's crucial to discuss the man who spent his entire life discovering lost items, only to end up becoming a forgotten object himself, before delving into the specifics of the ancient car they discovered, covered in dust. Frank wasn't your typical television personality. He had no interest in celebrity, fancy automobiles, or conforming to a certain glossy Hollywood stereotype. He was only interested in things that most people would pass right by without giving them a second glance, like rusty signs and ancient gas stations. We must go back in time and learn more about the real Frank Fritz, in order to comprehend why the discovery in his garage was so significant. Because you'll see why that car wasn't just another find. Once you see who he was from the start, it was a part of who he was. This car would be between 42,000 and 47,000 miles down the road, in my opinion. I am currently at 37,000. Frank Fritz was a typical child growing up in Davenport, Iowa, long before he ever appeared in front of a camera, or was well known. Despite coming from a modest background, he had a unique personality from the beginning. He was simply different from the other children. Frank was busy organizing his collection of beer cans by color, brand, and form, while they were out hunting baseballs or gathering trading cards. He would dig up intriguing rocks from the backyard, carefully store old shoeboxes and postal stamps, and proudly display them to anyone who would listen. His room, even as a youngster, resembled a small, well-organized flea shop rather than a bedroom, and he enjoyed it just that way. This passion wasn't a passing fad. One of Frank's lifelong traits was his intense curiosity, which led him to ask a lot of questions. He accepted a reputable position as a fire and safety inspector when he grew older. His heart wasn't in it, even though it was a responsible career with a consistent salary. He secretly had that hunger, that insatiable want to gather. He had never really broken the habit. He enjoyed driving throughout the back roads of Iowa and the neighboring states on his days off. It has a bit more power than the 335 because of its larger heads, don't you think? It likely costs an additional $25 per horse. That's quite a bit. 25 is a lot. He would stop at any roadside stand that seemed good, browse estate auctions, or stop by garage sales. He would bargain a little, load it up, and take it home if he saw anything as basic as an old oil can or a vintage motorcycle sign. According to many who knew Frank in those days, he always exuded the same easygoing, amiable vibe that we saw on television. He was friendly, a little messy, and had a loud chuckle that gave you the impression that you had known him for ages. He was the type of person you would meet at a neighborhood diner and spend an hour chatting with. Over time, his hobby of selecting began to take on a more significant form. He began receiving calls from members of the neighborhood who needed to get rid of attics or barns. Word spread that Frank Fritz had a keen sense of oddities and antiques. What started off as a hobby and evolved into a second career. Mike Wolfe came into the picture at that point. However, Frank's garage was already developing into a haven, a secret museum of his treasures that had significance beyond their monetary worth, even before a TV show was a flash in anyone's eye. And long before he realized what was ahead, the seeds of his future were being sown in that busy area. After years of choosing, Mike Wolfe had the brilliant idea to make the strange and fascinating world of antique hunting into a TV program. He was acquainted with Frank from the close-knit Iowan picking community. At first, they weren't quite best friends, but they were united by a love of lost things and a talent for recognizing worth where others saw trash. 63 split window. That's the mountain summit. They were like peanut butter and jelly. That's the best one, the most expensive, and the most collectible one ever manufactured. Frank had the quintessential beard, the unending supply of jokes, and the charm of the salt of the earth. He was the kind of guy you wanted to have beer with, the everyman. Mike was the one who had the idea, the motivation, and the will to pursue their passion. Mike was aware that Frank was the ideal collaborator for the project. Frank eventually made a huge leap of faith. He left his secure position as a fire inspector to focus entirely on collecting. starting his own little company, Frank's Finds. To explore a stranger's junkyard, he and Mike would go on road trips together, sometimes covering hundreds of miles. Devoted to his TV program concept, Mike began recording their travels in an attempt to capture the enchantment of the hunt for potential network pitches. They had a beat-up vehicle, a full tank of gas, and a common dream for a long time. They were repeatedly turned down, but they persisted. Eventually, after years of perseverance, the History Channel called. Frank already had a small but devoted following among local collectors by that time. In the world of pickers, his name had some significance, even though he wasn't yet well known. His instinct, his word, and his eye were trusted. Therefore, Frank and Mike's style of highway treasure hunting seemed like the ideal fit for producers who were searching for something fresh, unadulterated, and genuine. When American Pickers initially aired in 2010, it immediately resonated with the American public. The concept was straightforward: two men in a vehicle searching for lost history by sifting through garages and barns on rural country roads. However, the success of the presentation was not solely due to the discoveries. The people were the cause. Frank stood out without even trying. He wasn't acting like a different person. He was dressed in his go-to flannel shirts. He made cheesy jokes, and a sign made of rusting metal truly delighted him. He recognized him as a favorite uncle or friend, and he immediately captivated the audience. Frank and Mike weren't alone, of course. The anchor that kept the entire organization grounded was Danielle Colby, who oversaw the headquarters back in Iowa. She completed the team with her own distinct charm and perseverance. Because the three of them worked together to produce something that felt genuine. They truly enjoyed the excitement of the quest, the beauty found in old, worn objects, and the surprise of discovering something that had been hidden for decades. Frank's area of expertise became apparent as the years passed. He had a keen eye for oddball antique toys, unique oil cans, and vintage motorcycles. Frank was the one who would get excited over a hand-painted sign or a lunchbox that was decades old, while Mike would frequently run after the expensive, high-profit stuff. His unbridled enthusiasm was contagious. Frank Fritz, a modest picker from Iowa, became a symbol of America once the show became a worldwide sensation. However, when the seasons changed, things started to shift. The countless kilometers traveled began to wear on the body and the soul. As Frank's health deteriorated, friction between him and Mike began to simmer beneath the surface. Once so natural, the playful connection started to feel forced. There was undoubtedly a problem, and it was going to make all the difference. The silent battle and slow decline. At first, the alteration was subtle. Frank began to show signs of fatigue. Years of squeezing into small areas and lifting heavy antiques had left him with persistent back discomfort, which was exacerbated by his continuous fight with Crohn's disease. On screen, fans began to take notice. There was something strange about the simple banter between him and Mike. Rumors circulated about the two long-standing lovers developing personal estrangement from one another, disagreements over money, and creative differences. Frank's screen time thereafter started to decrease. He would miss full shows, then entire chunks. Finally, he vanished completely without warning. There was only silence, no elaborate send-off, no explanation, no huge parting episode. It was startling and perplexing to the millions of viewers who had welcomed him into their living rooms for more than 10 years. How could a man who was instrumental in starting the show simply disappear without saying anything? Fans' objections and inquiries eventually led to the release of an official statement. Mike Wolfe broke the ice by revealing that Frank was battling severe health problems. He explained that Frank needed time to recuperate after a significant back surgery. For fans, that was sufficient for a while. In the hopes that he would soon be back on the road, they extended their best wishes. However, weeks stretched into months, and finally a brand new season without him premiered. Rumors began to spread like wildfire. They were darker this time, indicating that Frank's absence had more to do with than just his back. Then, in a rare and startlingly open interview, Frank himself spoke up. He confirmed that the feud was real by sharing his side of the tale. He disclosed that it had been years since he and Mike had communicated. After his operation, he claimed that Mike never once contacted to see how he was doing. Frank claimed that the show had just moved on without him, and that he could feel the betrayal. This was more than a conflict at work. It was the tragic demise of a friendship that had served as the show's cornerstone for decades. People were unaware of how bad things were behind the scenes. Frank's health was rapidly deteriorating. The man in the few pictures that appeared online appeared to be much thinner and more worn out. According to friends, he had turned into a recluse who almost ever left his home. He had not been seen in years by collectors who had formerly encountered him at auctions and trade fairs. It seemed as though Frank Fritz was gradually disappearing, slipping out of his own reality, and nobody paid much attention until he was nearly extinct. The cheerful, kind picker, who had made so many others happy, was now dealing with his darkest moments by himself. The previously seemingly unshakable connection was now irreparably broken. Frank was left behind, struggling with his deteriorating health, his shattered friendship, and an increasingly grim future. As the show continued with a new face next to Mike, nobody realized that the worst was still to come, and that one incident would soon transform this depressing tale into a real tragedy. The news that everyone had been dreading finally arrived in July 2022. Surprisingly, it originated from Mike Wolf's personal Instagram account, rather than a news organization. Mike revealed that Frank Fritz had had a severe stroke in a brief but solemn post. He expressed his grief at the incident and asked supporters to pray for his old pal. This post served as many fans' first concrete reminder of how bad things had gotten, and the old feud appeared to take a backseat for a while. Frank was in really critical condition. He was unable to take care of himself after the stroke. In a matter of weeks, a court appointed a conservator and a legal guardian to oversee his financial and medical decisions. The world of the man who used to roam freely on the back roads of America was now contained behind the sterile confines of a rehabilitation center and hospital. There were virtually no updates for a long, agonizing time. In the midst of the deafening silence, rumors started to circulate. Misinformation started to proliferate on social media. Frank had already died, according to some, and it was being hushed up. He was in a perpetual coma, according to some. The stories became increasingly devastating as they spread like wildfire. The most persistent rumor then turned into a terrible reality about a year later. Frank Fritz was dead. He passed away in silence. In an odd turn of events, the public found out that Mike Wolf had been with him in the final moments. Mike, who had apparently moved on. The same Mike who had spent years apart from him. Whether they ever really made peace is unknown. If there was verbal communication, or if just being there was sufficient. According to several accounts, they conversed throughout those last few months. Some people think they didn't have to. For many, it was important that Mike was there when it mattered. Then Frank's anguish finally spoke, as the garage doors suddenly opened. Here's the question though. Was the friendship ruined by celebrity, or did it simply expose the truth? Tell us what you think, like and subscribe.